Millionaire was humiliated at his own party, until the cleaning lady asked if he was okay. Before the story begins, tell us where you're watching from. Subscribe to the channel. Help us grow on YouTube. Your support means everything to us. And at the end, don't forget to rate this story from 0 to 10. Now, enjoy the story. Integrity? The voice cut through the luxurious penthouse ballroom like a blade. Should we talk about integrity, Richard? Or should we discuss these? Richard Davenport's champagne glass nearly slipped from his hand as Victor Langford emerged from the crowd, holding up his phone with a triumphant smirk. The 47th floor of the Willis Tower in downtown Chicago had been filled with laughter and celebration just seconds ago. Now every single person in the room, CEOs, politicians, Chicago's elite, stared in stunned silence. "Victor, what the hell are you doing?" Richard's voice was steady, but his heart was racing. At 52, he had faced hostile takeovers, economic crashes, and corporate warfare. But something in Victor's eyes told him this was different. This was personal. What I should have done years ago. Victor swiped his phone, and the massive display screen behind Richard flickered to life. Ladies and gentlemen, meet the real Richard Davenport. The documents that appeared on the screen made Richard's blood freeze. Bank statements, contracts, official letterheads, all bearing what looked like his signature. The crowd gasped as they read words like bribery, tax evasion, and illegal land acquisition. "These are fake," Richard shouted, but his voice was drowned out by the growing murmur of the crowd. Victor's voice grew louder, more theatrical. 30 years of corruption, 30 years of stepping on honest people to build his empire, and you all celebrated him. Senator Patricia Welling, who had been laughing at Richard's jokes just minutes before, stared at the screen with horror. She was the first to move, setting down her glass and walking past Richard without a word, her face cold with disgust. "Patricia, wait, these documents are fabricated," Richard called out desperately. But it was too late. Like dominoes falling, the entire room began to turn against him. Victoria Ashworth, Chicago's most prominent socialite, whispered loudly, "I always knew there was something dirty about his success." Phone cameras appeared from every direction. The same people who had been toasting his greatest achievement were now recording his greatest humiliation. The ballroom that had been filled with admiration was now buzzing with judgment and disgust. "How could you look us in the eye and talk about honest work?" Victor stepped closer, his voice dripping with mock disappointment. "How could you lie to everyone who trusted you?" Richard's hands trembled with rage. Now he understood. Victor had been trying to force a merger between their companies for 2 years. Every offer had been rejected. This wasn't about justice. This was about revenge. "You orchestrated this entire thing," Richard said through gritted teeth, his voice barely audible above the chaos. Victor leaned in close. His whisper meant only for Richard's ears. "You should have accepted my partnership offer when you had the chance. Now watch your world burn." Within minutes, the exodus was complete. Servers stopped serving, musicians packed their instruments, and even Richard's own security team avoided eye contact. The celebration of the Davenport District, the largest commercial development in Chicago's history, had become a nightmare. The ballroom fell silent except for the sound of Richard's ragged breathing. Abandoned champagne glasses and wilted flowers surrounded him like the debris of a battlefield. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the Chicago skyline glittered mockingly below. 30 years of building his reputation. 30 years of honest work, of treating employees fairly, of giving back to the community. All destroyed in 20 minutes by a man whose only talent was inherited wealth. Richard collapsed into one of the ornate chairs, his face buried in his hands. For the first time since he was a child growing up in a trailer park on the South Side, he felt completely powerless. The sound of cleaning cartwheels rolling across marble broke the devastating silence. Richard didn't even look up. He couldn't face another person seeing him like this. broken, humiliated, destroyed. But then a voice. Soft, gentle, completely unexpected. "Excuse me. Are you okay?" "Dwar." Richard looked up slowly, his eyes red and exhausted. Standing before him was a woman in her late 30s, wearing a simple gray uniform with citywide cleaning services embroidered on the pocket. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her hands, weathered from years of hard work, gripped the handle of a cleaning cart. But it was her eyes that struck him, brown, warm, and filled with genuine concern, not pity, not judgment, just human kindness. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "I didn't mean to disturb you. You look like you're in pain." Richard stared at her, speechless. In 30 years of climbing the corporate ladder, no one had ever asked him that simple question with such sincerity. Not his business partners, not his social circle, not even his ex-wife during their divorce. "I'm Emily," she continued, setting down her spray bottle. "Emily Carter. I clean this building at night, and I've seen you here before. You always look confident, happy even. Tonight, you look broken." The word hit him like a physical blow. Broken. That's exactly what he was. "I'm fine," Richard lied, his voice barely audible. Emily tilted her head, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Mr. Davenport, with all due respect, you're sitting alone in a destroyed ballroom at midnight, still wearing a tuxedo, looking like someone just told you the world was ending. That's not fine." Richard's eyes widened. She knew who he was. Of course she did. His photo had been in the Chicago Tribune dozens of times. But she wasn't treating him like the disgraced millionaire from tonight's scandal. She was treating him like a person. "The whole city's probably talking about what happened here tonight," Richard said bitterly. "I'm sure you heard the rumors by now." Emily moved closer, her expression serious. "I heard some security guards talking about documents and accusations. But you know what I've learned in 38 years of life? Sometimes the people who shout the loudest are the ones with the most to hide." She pulled a small bottle of water from her cart and offered it to him. "You look dehydrated. And before you say you don't need help from the cleaning lady, remember that I'm the only person who stayed to check on you." Richard accepted the water, his hands trembling slightly. "Why?" he whispered. "Why do you care what happens to me?" Emily sat down in the chair across from him, ignoring the fact that she was getting the expensive fabric of the chair slightly damp from her cleaning supplies. "Because 3 years ago I was sleeping in my car in a Walmart parking lot with my 8-year-old daughter. It was the coldest February Chicago had seen in decades." Richard looked up, startled by her honesty. "A security guard could have called the police, had us removed. Instead, he brought us hot coffee and told us about a shelter that was still accepting families. He didn't know me. I was nobody to him. But he saw someone in trouble and decided to help." Emily's voice grew softer. "That security guard saved our lives. And tonight, you look like someone who needs saving." The silence stretched between them, broken only by the distant hum of the building's ventilation system. "What's your daughter's name?" Richard asked, surprising himself with the question. "Sophia. She's 11 now. Smartest kid in her class, wants to be a doctor." Emily's face lit up with pride. "She's sleeping at my neighbor Mrs. Rodriguez's place tonight while I work the late shift. 3 jobs, actually. I clean here, I work at a diner on the south side during the day, and I do weekend catering for events." 3 jobs? Richard couldn't hide his shock. That must be exhausting. "Exhausting is watching your daughter eat peanut butter sandwiches for dinner because it's all you can afford. Exhausting is lying awake, wondering if you'll make rent. This," she gestured around the ballroom, "this is just work." Richard felt something crack inside his chest. Here was a woman working 3 jobs to support her daughter, and she was comforting him. A man who owned multiple homes and drove cars worth more than most people's annual salaries. "Emily," he said carefully, "what if I could help? I mean, financially, I could—" "No." Her response was immediate and firm. I didn't tell you that story to ask for money, Mr. Davenport. I told you because everyone deserves to know they're not alone when the world feels like it's falling apart." The rejection stung, but not in the way Richard expected. It didn't hurt his pride. It humbled him. This woman had every reason to accept his help, every justification to take advantage of his guilt and desperation. Instead, she was offering him something far more valuable than money: dignity. "But there's something you could do," Emily said, standing up and returning to her cart. "Anything. Fight back." Her voice was steady, determined. "If those documents are fake, if that man was lying, then fight back. Don't let him win." Richard stood up slowly, feeling strength return to his legs for the first time in hours. "You believe me, even after everything you saw tonight?" Emily began spraying the abandoned champagne glasses with cleaning solution. "Mr. Davenport, I've cleaned offices in this city for 15 years. I've seen real corruption, men who steal pension funds, who fire employees right before Christmas to boost quarterly profits, who treat their workers like garbage. You know what I noticed about you?" "What?" "Every night when I clean your office, there's always a picture of your construction crews on your desk. Not just the supervisors, the actual workers. Their names written on the back. A man who remembers the names of people he's never met again isn't the kind of man who builds his fortune on other people's misery." Richard felt tears building in his eyes. "How do you know about the picture?" Emily smiled. "Because I dust it carefully every night. And because my cousin Miguel worked on your Millennium Park project 5 years ago. You personally visited the site when he broke his leg, made sure his medical bills were covered, and held his job until he could return. He still talks about it." The revelation hit Richard like lightning. Miguel, he remembered now. A young man with 2 small children and no insurance. Richard had spent 20 minutes talking to him about his family, had made sure the company's best doctors treated his injury. "That's when I knew," Emily continued, "that whatever happened here tonight, whatever that man in the expensive suit was trying to prove, it wasn't the whole truth." Richard wiped his eyes, feeling something he hadn't experienced in years: hope. "Emily Carter," he said, his voice stronger now, "you may have just saved my life." She turned to face him, cleaning spray still in hand. "Then don't waste it. Find the truth, fight for it, and when you do—" She paused, meeting his eyes directly. "Remember that the people worth fighting for are usually the ones who can't fight for themselves." As Emily returned to her work, methodically cleaning up the debris of Richard's shattered evening, he realized something profound had just happened. For the first time in decades, someone had seen past his money, past his reputation, past his public image, and had simply seen him. And somehow, that was enough to make him want to fight again. The next morning hit Richard like a sledgehammer. His penthouse apartment on Lakeshore Drive, usually a sanctuary of calm, with its panoramic views of Lake Michigan, felt like a prison. Every news channel was running the story. Every newspaper had his photo on the front page. The headlines were brutal: "Chicago mogul's corruption exposed," "The fall of Richard Davenport," 30 years of lies unraveled. Richard sat at his kitchen island, still wearing yesterday's wrinkled tuxedo shirt, staring at his laptop screen. His phone had been ringing nonstop since 6 a.m. Reporters, lawyers, former business partners. He'd turned it off an hour ago, but Emily's words echoed in his mind. Fight back. If those documents are fake, if that man was lying, then fight back. He opened his secure email and began downloading every document Victor had displayed the night before. As he studied them closely for the first time, his anger grew. The signatures were good, too good, professional forgeries. The bank statements showed transfers to accounts he'd never opened. The contracts referenced projects he'd never bid on. "Bastard," Richard muttered, zooming in on a particularly obvious fake. The letterhead on one document was from First National Bank of Chicago, but the address was wrong. Richard had banked there for 20 years. He knew their Roosevelt Road location by heart. This showed an address on Michigan Avenue that didn't exist. His doorbell rang. Richard ignored it. It rang again, followed by aggressive knocking. "Richard, I know you're in there." The voice was familiar but unexpected. James Morrison, his attorney and one of his oldest friends. Richard opened the door to find James holding a box of files and wearing an expression somewhere between fury and determination. "You look like hell," James said, pushing past Richard into the apartment. "Thanks, that's exactly what I needed to hear." James set the box on the dining table and turned to face his friend. "I've been going through every document from last night. Richard, this is the most sophisticated frame job I've seen in 30 years of law. Whoever did this had serious resources. Victor Langford. Can you prove it?" Richard pulled up the bank document on his laptop. "Look at this address. First National hasn't had an office on Michigan Avenue since 1987. Victor would know that. He's been banking there longer than I have." James leaned over the screen, his expression grim. "That's sloppy. What else?" "The timing. Every single fake transaction corresponds with days when I was either out of the country or in the hospital with my back surgery 2 years ago. Someone with access to my schedule planned this meticulously. We need more than suspicious timing, Richard. We need proof of fabrication." Richard's laptop chimed with a new email. His heart sank when he saw it was from Patricia Welling, the senator who had walked out on him last night. "Richard, I've known you for 15 years. What I saw last night breaks my heart. Until you can prove your innocence, I cannot associate with you politically or personally." "Patricia, she doesn't even want to hear my side," Richard said, showing James the email. "Patricia's up for re-election next year. She can't afford to be seen with you right now, even if she believes you're innocent." James sat down heavily. "Richard, we need to talk about damage control. Your board of directors is meeting this afternoon. There's talk of forcing you out. They can try. I still own controlling interest. Not if they can prove criminal activity. The shareholders could sue. Your assets could be frozen pending investigation." Richard felt the walls closing in again. Everything he'd built, everyone he'd trusted, all of it crumbling because of Victor's lies. His phone, which he'd turned back on to call James, buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Mr. Davenport, this is Emily Carter from last night. I hope you're okay. I'm working at Murphy's Diner on 47th Street today, if you need someone to talk to who isn't trying to sell your story to the newspapers. Emily." The message made him smile for the first time in 18 hours. "Who's Emily Carter?" James asked, reading over Richard's shoulder. "The cleaning lady, who was the only person to show me kindness last night. Richard, you need to be careful about who you trust right now. She's working 3 jobs to support her daughter." "I doubt she's part of Victor's conspiracy." James studied his friend's face. "You like her." "I respect her. There's a difference." Richard paused. "She told me something interesting. Her cousin Miguel worked on my Millennium Park project. She knew details about my business that only someone who'd actually worked for me would know." "What kind of details?" "That I personally visited him when he was injured, that I covered his medical bills and held his job." She said that's how she knew the accusations were false. James raised an eyebrow. "That's either very good character judgment or very good research." "You think she's working with Victor?" "I think you should be paranoid about everyone right now, but—" James hesitated. "My investigator ran a preliminary background check on Victor this morning. Richard, he's been planning something like this for months. He's hired 3 different private investigation firms, a public relations company, and a team of forensic accountants. This wasn't spontaneous revenge. This was a calculated takedown." Richard stood up and walked to the window overlooking Lake Michigan. The water was gray and choppy, matching his mood. "He wanted me to accept his merger proposal. When I refused, he decided to destroy me and pick up the pieces. That's what I think, too. But proving it will take time. we might not have. Richard's phone buzzed again. This time it was a news alert. Breaking. FBI opens investigation into Davenport Development Corp. Jesus, James whispered, reading over Richard's shoulder. They're fast-tracking this. Someone with serious political connections is pushing for your head. Victor has friends in Washington, big donors to campaigns, including Patricia's. Richard, if the FBI freezes your assets, you won't be able to pay legal fees. You need to liquidate some holdings immediately, transfer money to accounts they can't touch. But Richard wasn't listening. He was thinking about Emily's words. The people worth fighting for are usually the ones who can't fight for themselves. His employees, his construction crews, the families who depended on his company for their livelihoods. If he went down, hundreds of people would lose their jobs. People like Miguel, who had children to feed and bills to pay. James, I need you to do something for me. Name it. Set up a meeting with Victor, tonight, somewhere public. Richard, that's insane. He just destroyed your reputation. Why would you want to? Because I'm going to give him a chance to tell me the truth. And when he refuses, I'm going to know exactly what kind of war I'm fighting. James stared at his friend. You're not going to try to negotiate with him, are you? Richard turned back to the window, his reflection ghost-like in the glass. No, James, I'm going to look him in the eye and remind him that he just declared war on the wrong man. Outside, storm clouds were gathering over Lake Michigan. Richard watched them approach, feeling something he hadn't experienced since building his first apartment complex 30 years ago, the thrill of a fight worth having. Emily was right. It was time to fight back. The signature room on the 95th floor of the John Hancock Building was Victor's choice for their meeting. At 8 p.m., the restaurant was buzzing with Chicago's elite, the same crowd that had witnessed Richard's humiliation just 24 hours earlier. Victor's message was clear. He owned this world now. Richard arrived first, choosing a corner table with his back to the wall. He'd changed into a sharp navy suit, his silver hair perfectly styled. If this was going to be his last stand in Chicago's social circles, he'd look the part. Victor appeared 15 minutes later, flanked by two men in expensive suits, undoubtedly lawyers or security. He wore a satisfied smirk as he approached the table, clearly enjoying every moment of Richard's fall from grace. "Richard," Victor said, extending his hand with mock cordiality, "you look tired." Richard ignored the handshake. "Cut the act, Victor. It's just us now." Victor sat down, dismissing his entourage with a wave. "Actually, it's never just us, is it? There are always consequences, always people watching." He gestured around the restaurant. "Like right now, half the people here are taking photos of us with their phones." "Why?" Richard leaned forward. "Why destroy me instead of just competing with me?" "Because you're naive, Richard. You actually believe in fair competition, honest business, treating workers like human beings. You make the rest of us look bad." Victor's smile turned cold. "When you turned down my merger offer for the third time, I realized you'd never change. So I decided to remove you from the equation entirely. And frame me for crimes I never committed." "Frame you?" Victor laughed. "Richard, those documents will hold up to any investigation. I've spent 2 years and $3 million making sure of that. The forensic accountants I hired are better than the FBI's. Richard felt his blood chill. "You're admitting you fabricated everything?" "I'm admitting I'm smarter than you ever gave me credit for." Victor leaned back, completely confident. "By next week, your company will be bankrupt. Your assets will be frozen, your reputation will be destroyed, and I'll buy everything for pennies on the dollar." "What about my employees? The families who depend on those jobs?" "What about them? This is business, Richard. Survival of the fittest." Richard's hands clenched into fists under the table. "You're talking about destroying hundreds of lives." "I'm talking about evolution. The weak get consumed by the strong. It's natural law." The conversation was interrupted by a waitress approaching their table. Richard looked up. and froze. It was Emily, wearing a black uniform with signature catering embroidered on the chest. She was carrying a tray of drinks for another table, but had stopped when she recognized him. "Mr. Davenport," she said softly. "I didn't expect to see you here." Victor's eyes narrowed as he studied Emily. "And you are?" "Emily Carter," she replied, her voice steady despite the obvious tension. "I work catering events here on weekends." "The cleaning lady from last night," Victor said with amusement. "How quaint. Richard, are you seriously involving the help in our business discussion?" Emily's jaw tightened. "I should get back to work." "Actually, stay," Richard said, an idea forming. "Emily, I'd like you to meet Victor Langford, the man who orchestrated my public humiliation last night." Emily looked between the two men, clearly uncomfortable. "I really should—" "Tell me, Emily," Victor interrupted. "What's your last name again?" "Carter, Emily Carter." Victor's expression changed subtly. Something flickered in his eyes. Recognition or perhaps calculation. "Carter, that's an interesting name. How long have you lived in Chicago?" "Most of my life," Emily replied cautiously. "And your parents? Are they from Chicago as well?" Richard noticed Emily's discomfort increasing. "Victor, leave her alone." "It's okay," Emily said, though her voice was tighter now. "My mother was Jennifer Brooks. She passed away when I was young." The words hit Richard like a physical blow. Jennifer Brooks. The name crashed through his memory like a wrecking ball. 25 years ago. A brief but intense relationship with a woman who had disappeared from his life without explanation. Victor was watching Richard's face intently, and his smile returned. Jennifer Brooks. Now that's a name that brings back memories, doesn't it, Richard? Richard's mouth went dry. "What are you talking about?" "Jennifer Brooks," Victor continued, his voice full of malicious glee. "Sweet, beautiful Jennifer, the woman you dated for 6 months in 1999. The woman who left Chicago suddenly and never came back. The woman who was pregnant when she left." Emily's face went white. "What did you say?" Victor pulled out his phone and scrolled through it. "I told you I'd spent 2 years researching you, Richard. Every business deal, every relationship, every secret, including the daughter you never knew you had." He turned the phone toward Emily, showing her a photo. Richard caught a glimpse of it. A young woman with dark hair and familiar brown eyes holding a baby. The woman looked exactly like Emily, but 25 years younger. "This is your mother, Jennifer Brooks, holding you as a baby. The photo was taken 3 months after she left Chicago, 3 months after she discovered she was carrying Richard Davenport's child." Emily staggered backward, nearly dropping her tray. That's impossible." Richard stared at Emily with new eyes. The brown eyes that had seemed so familiar. The gentle strength that reminded him of someone he couldn't place. The way she carried herself with dignity despite her circumstances. "Emily," Richard whispered, his voice barely audible. "How old are you?" 25, she said, tears forming in her eyes. "I'll be 26 next month." The math was perfect. Richard counted backward. September 1999. The month Jennifer had disappeared from his life without explanation, leaving only a brief note saying she needed to start fresh somewhere new. Victor was practically glowing with satisfaction. "Isn't this touching? A family reunion 25 years in the making. Richard, meet your daughter. Emily, meet your father, the man whose company you've been cleaning up after for 3 years." Emily dropped her tray. The sound of breaking glass echoed through the restaurant as heads turned toward their table. She looked at Richard with a mixture of shock, anger, and devastation. "You're my father?" she whispered. "You're my father, and you've been living in luxury while I've been working 3 jobs just to survive?" Richard reached toward her. "Emily, I swear I didn't know. Your mother never told me—" "Don't!" Emily stepped back, her voice rising. "Don't you dare make excuses. You had everything. Money, power, connections. And you never once tried to find her? Never once wondered what happened to the woman who just disappeared from your life?" The restaurant had gone quiet. Every patron was watching the drama unfold. Cell phones were recording. This would be on social media within minutes. "I did try to find her," Richard said desperately. "I hired investigators. I searched for months. She didn't want to be found." Because she was pregnant and scared. Emily's tears were flowing freely now. Because she was 22 years old and didn't know how to tell a millionaire businessman that she was carrying his child. Victor stood up slowly, savoring every moment. "This is better than I could have hoped for." Richard Davenport, disgraced businessman, meets the daughter he abandoned. The headlines will write themselves. Emily turned to Victor with fire in her eyes. "And you. You orchestrated this whole thing. You used me to hurt him." "Actually, my dear, you used yourself. I simply provided the stage." Victor adjusted his tie. "Richard, I'll give you 24 hours to consider my final offer. Sign over controlling interest in your company to me, and I'll make sure this touching family drama stays out of the papers. Refuse, and tomorrow morning the world will know that Chicago's most prominent developer abandoned his pregnant girlfriend and his daughter." With that, Victor walked away, leaving Richard and Emily standing in the wreckage of their shattered worlds. Emily looked at Richard one more time, her eyes filled with a pain so deep it took his breath away. 25 years, she whispered. 25 years I wondered who my father was. I used to dream that maybe he was someone important, someone who would want me if he knew I existed. She picked up the broken pieces of her tray with shaking hands. "I guess I got my wish. You are someone important. You just don't want me. Emily, please." But she was already walking away, leaving Richard standing alone in a room full of strangers, facing the devastating truth that his greatest enemy had just revealed, his greatest failure. He wasn't just a man who had lost his fortune and reputation. He was a father who had lost his daughter before he even knew she existed. Richard didn't sleep that night. He sat in his penthouse living room until dawn, staring at a box of old photographs he'd retrieved from storage. 25 years of memories he'd tried to forget, all centered around 6 months in 1999 when Jennifer Brooks had turned his world upside down. There she was in photo after photo, laughing at Navy Pier, stealing his coffee at a Lincoln Park cafe, dancing at a charity gala where she'd worn a simple blue dress that had made every other woman in the room look overdressed. Jennifer had been different from the wealthy socialites he usually dated. She worked as a graphic designer, drove a beat-up Honda Civic, and had the most infectious laugh he'd ever heard. But even then, Richard remembered, there had been shadows in her eyes. Days when she would withdraw, becoming quiet and distant. She'd mentioned struggling with anxiety, had talked about feeling overwhelmed by the pace of his world, the constant pressure to be perfect, and then she was gone. One September morning, he'd found only a note. "Richard, I need to start fresh somewhere new. Please don't try to find me. This is for the best. Jay." He had tried to find her for months, but Jennifer Brooks seemed to have vanished completely. Now he knew why. At 7 a.m., Richard called James. "I need you to find everything you can about Jennifer Brooks, born around 1977, lived in Chicago in 1999, worked as a graphic designer." "Richard, it's 7 in the morning. And why are you investigating?" "She's Emily's mother. Emily is my daughter, James." The silence on the other end of the line stretched for nearly a minute. "Jesus Christ," James finally whispered. "Are you sure?" Victor knew. He's known all along. This whole thing, the fake documents, the public humiliation, it was all designed to lead to this moment, to destroy me and hurt her at the same time. At 8 a.m., Richard was standing outside Murphy's Diner on 47th Street. Through the window, he could see Emily serving breakfast to a table of construction workers, her movements efficient and professional, despite the emotional devastation she'd endured just hours earlier. The bell above the door chimed as he entered. Emily looked up, and her face immediately hardened. "We're closed to you," she said loudly enough for the entire diner to hear. The construction workers turned to look. One of them, a large man with graying hair, stood up. "Is this guy bothering you, Emily?" "No, Frank, he's just leaving." Richard approached slowly, his hands visible and non-threatening. "Emily, please, give me 5 minutes to explain." "Explain what? How you abandoned my mother? How you never tried to find us?" The diner had gone completely quiet. Every customer was watching the confrontation. "That's not what happened," Richard said softly. "Your mother left me. She disappeared without explanation. I spent months trying to find her." Emily's laugh was bitter. "Right, the all-powerful Richard Davenport couldn't find one woman." Richard pulled out his phone and showed her a photo, a newspaper clipping from 2000. The headline read, "Missing Woman Search Continues." Jennifer's photo was prominently displayed. "I hired 3 different private investigation firms," Richard said. "I offered a $50,000 reward for information about her whereabouts. I ran ads in newspapers in 12 different cities." Emily stared at the photo, her confidence wavering for the first time. "She never told me she was pregnant," Richard continued. "If I'd known, nothing in this world would have stopped me from finding her." "You're lying." "Emily, look at me," Richard's voice broke slightly. "Do you really think I would abandon my own child?" The word hit Emily like a physical blow. She sat down heavily in the nearest booth. "What did she tell you about your father?" Richard asked gently. Emily's voice dropped to a whisper. "She said my father was a good man, but that she couldn't handle being in his world. She said she had problems, emotional problems that made it hard for her to cope with stress." Richard's heart clenched. He remembered Jennifer's panic attacks, the way she would sometimes disappear for hours when the pressure of his social events became too much. "She told me she suffered from severe anxiety and depression," Emily continued. "That she was afraid of dragging him down with her problems. She said it was better for everyone if she just disappeared." "She was getting help," Richard said quietly. "She was seeing a therapist. I thought she was getting better." "She was, in some ways," Emily wiped her eyes. "But when she found out she was pregnant, everything got worse. She was terrified she wouldn't be a good mother. She was convinced that her mental health issues would ruin both your life and the baby's life." Wait. Frank, the construction worker, sat back down slowly. The hostility in the diner had shifted to uncomfortable sympathy. "She never told you any of this?" Emily asked. Richard shook his head. "She just left. One day she was there, laughing and making plans for the weekend. The next morning, there was only a note." "She kept a journal," Emily said, her voice barely audible. "I found it after she died. Page after page about how much she loved you, but how terrified she was that her anxiety and depression would destroy your relationship. She was convinced that having a baby would make everything worse." Richard felt like he'd been punched in the stomach. "Emily, I loved her. Her struggles, her anxiety, none of that would have changed how I felt. But she couldn't see that. She could only see her own fear." Emily's tears flowed freely now. "She wrote about feeling like she was drowning, like everyone around her was moving forward while she was stuck. She was convinced that telling you about the pregnancy would trap you in a life you didn't want. The only life I didn't want was one without her." Emily looked up at him, studying his face carefully. "She died when I was 15, breast cancer. But even while she was dying, she talked about you. She said you were the love of her life, but that she'd made the right choice by leaving. She was sick for 2 years. She hid it for the first year, kept working, kept taking care of me. By the time I found out, it was too late." Emily's voice broke. "We lost our apartment when she couldn't work anymore. I aged out of foster care at 18 with nothing." The weight of Emily's words crushed Richard. While he'd been building his empire, his daughter had been watching her mother die and struggling to survive alone. "Emily, I'm so sorry. If I'd known—" "But you didn't know, and she made sure you never would." Emily pulled out a worn photograph from her purse, a picture of a young woman with gentle eyes and a sad smile. holding a baby. This is the only picture I have of her holding me. Look at her face. Can you see it?" Richard studied the photo and felt his heart break. Even in the moment of holding her newborn daughter, Jennifer's eyes held a deep sadness, a kind of exhaustion that went beyond physical tiredness. "She was struggling," Richard whispered, "every day, but she loved me fiercely, and she loved you enough to let you go rather than burden you with her problems." Frank stood up and approached their table cautiously. "Emily, honey, I've been listening to this conversation, and I gotta say something. I lost my wife to depression 15 years ago. She took her own life because she was convinced that her mental illness was destroying our family." Emily looked up at him with fresh tears. "The thing about people with depression and anxiety," Frank continued, "is that their brains lie to them. They convince themselves that they're burdens, that everyone would be better off without them. Your mother probably thought she was saving both of you by leaving." Richard nodded slowly. "She used to have panic attacks at business dinners. She'd excuse herself and disappear for an hour. I thought she was just shy, uncomfortable with the attention." "She was terrified she was embarrassing you," Emily said. "She wrote about it constantly, how she felt like she didn't belong in your world, how everyone could see that she was broken." "She wasn't broken," Richard said firmly. "She was the strongest, most beautiful person I'd ever met. Her struggles didn't define her, but she couldn't see that." Emily clutched the photograph tighter. "When she found out she was pregnant, she convinced herself that having a baby would make her mental health worse, and that would destroy your life. She thought she was being selfless." Richard reached across the table and gently touched Emily's hand. "Your mother was many things, creative, brilliant, kind, funny. But she was wrong about one thing. Having you, raising you together, that wouldn't have been a burden. It would have been the greatest gift of my life." For the first time since last night's revelation, Emily looked at Richard without anger. Instead, her eyes held something much more complex. Grief for the family that might have been, and a desperate need to understand the love story that created her. "I need time," she whispered finally. "I need to process all of this." "Of course, take all the time you need." Emily stood up slowly. "The journal. Would you want to read it, to understand what she was going through?" "Only if you're comfortable sharing it." Emily nodded once. "Maybe it's time both of us understood the truth about what happened 25 years ago." As Emily headed for the door, she paused and looked back at Richard. "She never stopped loving you. Even at the end, she would say your name in her sleep." Richard watched his daughter disappear into the Chicago morning, carrying the weight of her mother's mental illness and the beginning of something that might eventually become understanding. Through the window, he realized that Jennifer's greatest fear, that her problems would destroy the people she loved, had come true in the worst possible way. Her attempt to protect them had cost them 25 years of being a family. But maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late to honor her memory by finally bringing that family together. 3 days after reading Jennifer's journal, Richard felt like he'd been reborn with a singular purpose. The leather-bound notebook Emily had shared with him contained 25 pages of heartbreak, Jennifer's daily struggle with anxiety, her overwhelming love for him, and her growing terror that pregnancy would make her mental illness unmanageable. March 12, 1999, Richard held me during another panic attack tonight. I could see the worry in his eyes. He thinks he's helping, but I'm just dragging him down into my darkness. How can I tell him I'm pregnant when I can barely take care of myself? April 3, 1999, saw Dr. Martinez today. She says postpartum depression could be severe given my history. What if I hurt the baby? What if I can't function as a mother? Richard deserves better than a broken woman and a child he never planned for. September 10th, 1999. I'm leaving tomorrow. Richard will be angry, then hurt, then he'll move on. The baby and I will be better off somewhere quiet, away from his world. This is love, letting go before I destroy everything beautiful. Now, sitting in his downtown office at 6 a.m., Richard channeled that pain into cold, calculated fury. Victor had known about Jennifer's journal, had probably read every word, had used his daughter's most private family tragedy as ammunition for revenge. James burst through the door carrying a stack of files and a laptop. "Richard, we've got him." "What did you find?" "Better than that. Emily found him." James set up his laptop on Richard's desk. "She called me yesterday, said she wanted to help expose the man who used her mother's mental illness as a weapon." Richard's eyebrows shot up. "Emily called you?" "Apparently she's been doing some investigating of her own. Turns out, working 3 jobs around the city gives you access to a lot of people and a lot of information." James opened his laptop and pulled up a series of photographs. These were taken by Emily's friend Maria, who works night security at the Langford Financial Building. Look at the timestamps. The photos showed Victor entering his building at 2 a.m. on multiple occasions over the past month, always carrying boxes and always alone. "Why would a billionaire be doing manual labor at 2 in the morning?" Richard asked. "Because he was shredding evidence." Emily convinced Maria to check the building's dumpsters the morning after each late-night visit. James pulled out a folder filled with partially shredded documents. "Maria collected these. Look at this." Richard examined the papers. Even torn apart, he could make out portions of letterheads from 3 different private investigation firms, all with Victor's signature on retainer agreements. "He hired investigators to research you going back 5 years, James continued. "But more importantly, look at this." James handed him a mostly intact document, a psychiatric evaluation report with Jennifer Brooks's name at the top. Richard felt sick. He had her medical records? Illegally obtained. "This report details her anxiety and depression, her fears about motherhood, everything. Victor used her mental health records to plan his attack. That's a federal crime. Multiple federal crimes, medical records theft, identity fraud, and look at this." James pulled up another photo on his laptop. "Emily also discovered that Victor's been having your office building monitored for months. She found hidden cameras in the cleaning supply closets." Richard stared at the tiny cameras Emily had photographed. "He was watching her. He knew she was my daughter before any of us did." "Which brings us to the beautiful irony of this situation," James smiled grimly. "Victor's obsession with destroying you through Emily is what's going to destroy him." Richard's phone buzzed with a text from Emily. "Can you meet me at the diner at 3 p.m.? I have something to show you." "She's not done," Richard said, showing James the message. At 3 p.m., Richard found Emily waiting in a corner booth at Murphy's Diner, surrounded by laptop computers, printed documents, and what appeared to be surveillance equipment. "Did you rob an electronics store?" Richard asked, sitting down across from her. Emily smiled, the first real smile he'd seen from her. "Better. I robbed Victor's entire operation." She opened one of the laptops and turned it toward him. "It turns out, when you work cleaning services in 3 different high-rise buildings, you overhear a lot of phone conversations, and when those buildings house law firms, private investigation companies, and financial institutions, you hear some very interesting things. Emily, what did you do?" "I did what Mom never could. I fought back." Her voice was steady, determined. "For 3 weeks, I've been documenting Victor's conspiracy. Names, dates, phone calls, meetings. I have recordings of him bragging to his lawyers about framing you." Richard stared at her in amazement. "You recorded him?" "Cleaning ladies are invisible, Dad." The word slipped out naturally, and both of them paused at its significance. "People talk around us like we're furniture. Victor had meetings in his office while I was cleaning. He never once considered that the woman emptying his trash might be listening." She played an audio file on her laptop. Victor's voice came through clearly. "Richard will be finished by the end of the month. The FBI investigation is just the beginning. Once his assets are frozen, I'll buy his company for 20 cents on the dollar." But this is the best part, Emily continued, opening another file. Victor made one critical mistake. He hired his nephew, Danny Langford, to help plant the fake documents. Danny's a drug addict who's been in and out of rehab 6 times. Whoa, how was that helpful? Because Danny kept copies of everything as insurance against his uncle. And 2 days ago, Danny's girlfriend reached out to me through Facebook. Apparently, Danny's been telling her for weeks that his uncle was framing an innocent man and it was eating him alive. Emily pulled out a flash drive. Danny gave me everything, the original fake documents before they were aged and doctored, the emails between Victor and the forgers, the bank records showing payments to the private investigators who stole Mom's medical files. Richard felt his heart racing. Emily, this is incredible, but it's also dangerous. If Victor finds out what you've been doing, he already knows. Emily's expression darkened. Yesterday morning, I found this on my car windshield. She handed him a note written in Victor's handwriting. Your mother was smart enough to disappear when she became a problem. Don't make me solve the same problem twice. Richard's blood turned to ice. He threatened you. He made a mistake threatening the daughter of Richard Davenport. Emily leaned forward, and Richard saw something in her eyes he recognized. His own determination, his own refusal to back down from a fight. Because now this isn't just about clearing your name. This is about justice for Mom, for all the people he's hurt, and for the family he tried to destroy. Emily, I can't let you put yourself in danger for me. You don't get to make that choice. Her voice was firm but not angry. For 25 years, I believed I was abandoned. For 25 years, I thought my father didn't want me. I'm not walking away from the chance to fight alongside you now. Richard felt tears building in his eyes. Your mother would be so proud of you. She would be proud of both of us. She spent her whole life running from problems because her illness made her believe she was too weak to fight. But we're not weak, Dad. And we're not running. Emily opened her laptop and pulled up a detailed plan of action. Here's what we're going to do. Tomorrow morning, we're going to hold a press conference. You're going to present all of Victor's crimes to the FBI and the media simultaneously. No more playing defense. We're going on the offensive. And Victor? Emily's smile was cold and satisfied. Victor's going to learn what happens when you use a grieving daughter's mental illness as a weapon. He's going to discover that Jennifer Brooks didn't raise a victim. She raised a fighter. As they sat together planning Victor's downfall, Richard realized something profound had happened. Emily wasn't just helping him clear his name. She was becoming the partner he'd never known he needed. The daughter he had lost was becoming the ally who would help him win the most important battle of his life. And somewhere in heaven, he hoped Jennifer was finally at peace, knowing that the family she'd tried to protect by sacrificing herself was finally fighting together. The grand ballroom of the Palmer House, Hilton, was packed beyond capacity. Every major news outlet in Chicago had sent reporters, cameras lined the walls, and the city's most prominent business leaders filled the ornate chairs. Richard had chosen this venue deliberately. It was where Victor had announced his own business victories for the past decade. At 10 a.m. sharp, Richard walked to the podium wearing his sharpest navy suit, flanked by James Morrison and FBI agent Amanda Rodriguez. But the biggest surprise was Emily, dressed in a professional black blazer, standing confidently beside her father. The room erupted in whispers. Chicago's elite hadn't expected to see the disgraced mogul's cleaning lady daughter at his side, looking every inch the accomplished businesswoman. "Ladies and gentlemen," Richard began, his voice carrying across the silent ballroom. 3 days ago, I was publicly humiliated in this very hotel by a man who claimed to have evidence of my corruption. Today, I'm here to reveal the truth about Victor Langford's criminal conspiracy. The massive screens behind Richard flickered to life, displaying FBI case numbers and official federal charges. Victor Langford stands accused of 17 federal crimes, including forgery, fraud, theft of medical records, illegal surveillance, and racketeering. Richard's voice grew stronger with each word. The evidence I'm presenting today will show that he spent 2 years and $3 million orchestrating my destruction. Agent Rodriguez stepped forward. This morning, federal agents arrested Victor Langford at his Lakeshore Drive residence. He is currently being held without bail pending trial. The room exploded. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. And several of Victor's known associates quietly slipped toward the exits. But this story isn't really about Victor Langford, Richard continued, raising his voice above the chaos. It's about the people he hurt in his quest for power. It's about a young woman named Jennifer Brooks, who died 12 years ago from breast cancer, alone and penniless, because she was too afraid to ask for help. Emily stepped forward to the microphone cluster. The room fell silent, every person straining to hear what the mysterious daughter would say. "My name is Emily Carter Brooks Davenport," she said, her voice clear and strong. "Jennifer Brooks was my mother. Richard Davenport is my father, and Victor Langford used my mother's struggle with mental illness as a weapon against both of us." The silence was deafening. "For 25 years, I believe my father had abandoned us," Emily continued. "My mother suffered from severe anxiety and depression, and when she became pregnant with me, her illness convinced her that telling my father would ruin his life, so she disappeared, changed her name, and raised me alone." Richard watched his daughter with tremendous pride. 3 weeks ago, she'd been working 3 jobs just to survive. Now she was commanding the attention of the most powerful people in Chicago. "Victor Langford discovered my identity months ago," Emily said. "He illegally obtained my mother's medical records, traced her movements, and planned this entire conspiracy around the knowledge that my father had a daughter he never knew existed." James stepped forward and activated the screens again. Audio began playing, Victor's voice clearly audible. "The beauty of this plan is that it destroys him personally and professionally. When people learn he abandoned his own child, he'll be finished forever." The room erupted again. Senator Patricia Welling, who had shunned Richard 3 days earlier, was visibly shaken. "But Victor made one critical error," Emily continued with a slight smile. "He underestimated what happens when you threaten a family that's finally found each other." The screens now showed photographs of Victor entering buildings at night, documents proving his forgery conspiracy, and bank records tracking millions in illegal payments. "My mother spent her entire life believing she was too broken to deserve love," Emily said, her voice growing emotional. "She died thinking she'd saved us by staying away. Victor Langford took that tragedy and weaponized it for profit." Richard stepped back to the microphone. "Jennifer Brooks was the strongest, most selfless person I ever knew. Her mental illness wasn't a weakness. It was a challenge she faced every day with incredible courage. And she raised a daughter who inherited that same strength." He turned to look at Emily with pure paternal pride. "Emily Carter Brooks Davenport is now a full partner in Davenport Development Corporation. She will oversee our new mental health initiative, providing support and resources for employees struggling with anxiety, depression, and other challenges." The announcement stunned the room. Richard was not only clearing his name, he was promoting his previously unknown daughter to a major executive position. "Furthermore," Richard continued, "we are establishing the Jennifer Brooks Foundation, dedicated to supporting anyone struggling with mental health challenges, with specialized programs for women in vulnerable situations. No person should have to suffer in silence, and no woman should have to choose between seeking help and protecting her family." Emily wiped tears from her eyes as the room erupted in applause. Agent Rodriguez returned to the microphone. "Victor Langford's assets have been frozen pending restitution to his victims. His company, Langford Financial, is under federal investigation for additional crimes dating back 15 years. A reporter shouted from the audience, "Mr. Davenport, how does it feel to have your daughter's help in bringing down your enemy?" Richard looked at Emily, then back at the crowd. It feels like coming home after 25 years of being lost. Emily, another reporter called out, "What's next for you?" Emily smiled confidently. "I'm going back to school to finish my business degree. My father's company is paying for it. And then I'm going to help him build something my mother would be proud of, a business that treats every employee like family." As the press conference concluded, Richard and Emily stood together facing the cameras. The man who had been humiliated in this same hotel 3 days earlier was now victorious. But the real victory wasn't over Victor Langford. The real victory was the young woman standing beside him, no longer the invisible cleaning lady, but Emily Davenport, his daughter, his partner, and his greatest source of pride. Later that evening, Richard and Emily sat in his penthouse, watching the sunset over Lake Michigan. The news was calling it the biggest corporate scandal in Chicago history. Victor would likely spend the rest of his life in federal prison. "Mom would have loved this view," Emily said softly. "She did love it," Richard replied. "I brought her here once early in our relationship. She stood at that window for an hour, talking about how the lake looked like it went on forever." "What do you think she would say about all this?" Richard considered the question carefully. "I think she would say that mental illness tried to win by keeping us apart. But love won in the end because it brought us together." Emily leaned against her father's shoulder, finally allowing herself to feel the family connection she'd dreamed of her entire life. "So what happens now?" she asked. "Now we build something beautiful," Richard said. "For her, for us, for everyone who's ever felt too broken to deserve love." Outside, Chicago glittered in the twilight, and for the first time in 25 years, the Davenport family was complete. 6 months later, the Davenport Development Corporation headquarters buzzed with an energy that hadn't existed in years. The 32nd floor, once reserved for executive meetings, had been transformed into the Jennifer Brooks Foundation offices. Through the glass walls, Richard could see Emily leading a support group session, her voice gentle but confident as she spoke with a circle of women from across Chicago. "The quarterly numbers just came in," James said, entering Richard's office with a satisfied smile. "Company profits are up 40% since the restructuring. Turns out treating employees like family is actually good for business." Richard nodded, but his attention remained on Emily. In 6 months, she had transformed from a woman working 3 jobs to survive into one of Chicago's most respected advocates for mental health awareness. Her business degree would be completed next spring, but she was already revolutionizing how corporations approached employee wellness. "The foundation?" Richard asked. "Even better. The Jennifer Brooks Foundation has helped over 800 people in its first 6 months. Emily's programs for vulnerable women have a 94% success rate for long-term stability." James paused. "Richard, your daughter is remarkable." Through the glass, Richard watched Emily embrace a young woman who was clearly emotional. 6 months ago, that same woman had been living in her car with 2 small children. Today, she was starting a new job in the Foundation's job placement program. "Mr. Davenport," his assistant's voice came through the intercom. "There's someone here to see you. She says her name is Sophia Carter, and she's Emily's daughter." Richard's eyebrows shot up. "Send her in." The door opened, and an 11-year-old girl with Emily's brown eyes and confident posture walked in. She was dressed in a school uniform and carrying a backpack covered in science-themed patches. "Hi, Grandpa," Sophia said with a bright smile. "Mom's in her meeting, but I wanted to show you something." Richard's heart melted. Over the past 6 months, building a relationship with Sophia had been one of his greatest joys. The brilliant, curious girl reminded him so much of Emily at that age, determined, kind, and wise beyond her years. "What do you have for me, sweetheart?" Sophia pulled a report card from her backpack. "All A's. And look." She pointed to a teacher's note at the bottom. Mrs. Henderson says I have the highest science scores in the 6th grade. She thinks I should apply for the advanced program at Lincoln Park Academy. Sophia, this is incredible. Richard hugged his granddaughter tightly. Your mom is going to be so proud. She already knows. She cried happy tears this morning. Ein. Sophia sat in the chair across from Richard's desk, looking suddenly serious. Grandpa, can I ask you something? Anything? Do you think Grandma Jennifer would be proud of us, of what we've built together? The question hit Richard with unexpected emotion. In therapy sessions with Emily, they had worked through much of their grief about the lost years. But moments like this still took his breath away. Sophia, I think your grandmother would be amazed, Richard said carefully. She spent her whole life believing that her struggles made her a burden to the people she loved. But look what you and your mom have accomplished. Look at all the people the foundation has helped. Your grandmother's story, her struggles, and her love are helping hundreds of families stay together. Sophia nodded thoughtfully. Mom says Grandma was sick in her brain, but that doesn't mean she wasn't brave. Your mom is exactly right. Mental illness is just like any other illness. It's not anyone's fault, and it doesn't make someone weak. The office door opened and Emily appeared, her face glowing with the satisfaction of another successful support group session. There you are, Sophia. How did the report card presentation go? Grandpa says I'm brilliant, Sophia announced matter-of-factly. Grandpa is correct, Emily laughed, moving to hug both her father and daughter. And I have some news of my own. Richard looked at his daughter expectantly. The City Council just approved our proposal for the Jennifer Brooks Mental Health Center. We're breaking ground next month on a full-service facility that will provide free counseling, job training, child care, and housing assistance. Emily's eyes filled with happy tears. It's going to be beautiful, Dad, a place where people can get help without shame or fear. Richard felt overwhelmed with pride and emotion. Emily, that's extraordinary. There's more. I got a call from the governor's office this morning. They want to use our model statewide. The Jennifer Brooks Foundation could help thousands of families across Illinois. Sophia jumped up excitedly. Does that mean you'll be famous, Mom? It means we'll be helping people the way we wished someone had helped Grandma Jennifer, Emily replied, smoothing her daughter's hair. Richard stood and walked to the window overlooking downtown Chicago. The city sprawled before them, millions of people living their lives, facing their challenges, building their dreams. Somewhere out there were families like theirs, separated by misunderstanding, struggling with mental illness, believing they were too broken to deserve love. You know what I think? Richard said, turning back to his family. I think your grandmother orchestrated all of this from wherever she is now. I think she knew that her story, as painful as it was, would eventually help heal other families. Emily joined him at the window, Sophia between them. She always said everything happens for a reason. I used to think that was just something people say to make sense of tragedy. But maybe she was preparing us for this, Richard finished. Maybe the 25 years we lost were the price we paid to be able to help others find each other. Sophia looked up at both of them with the serious expression she wore when processing big ideas. So Grandma Jennifer was like a superhero. She sacrificed herself to save other families. Emily and Richard exchanged a look of amazement at their 11-year-old philosopher. Yes, sweetheart, Emily said softly. Grandma Jennifer was exactly like a superhero. And now we get to carry on her mission. As the 3 generations of Davenport stood together watching the sun set over Chicago, Richard felt a peace he'd never imagined possible. The man who had lost everything 6 months ago had gained something infinitely more valuable. A family united by love, strengthened by adversity, and dedicated to ensuring that no one else would have to suffer alone the way Jennifer had. His phone buzzed with a text from James. Victor Langford sentenced to 25 years in federal prison. Justice served. Richard showed the message to Emily, who nodded with satisfaction but no joy. Good, he can't hurt anyone else's family. What's next for us? Sophia asked, always thinking ahead. Richard looked at his daughter and granddaughter, two remarkable women who had taught him that the most important wealth couldn't be measured in dollars or buildings. Next, we keep building, he said. We keep helping. We keep being the family your grandmother always dreamed we could be. Emily squeezed his hand. Together, Richard agreed. And as Chicago sparkled to life in the evening darkness, the Davenport family began planning their next chapter, not as a broken family haunted by the past, but as a powerful force for healing, united by love and driven by the memory of a woman whose greatest fear had become her greatest legacy. The Jennifer Brooks Foundation would help thousands. Emily would become one of Chicago's most influential advocates for mental health reform. Sophia would grow up knowing she was loved, supported, and capable of changing the world. And Richard would spend the rest of his life making sure that no parent would lose 25 years with their child because mental illness convinced someone they were too broken to deserve love. In the end, love had won, not despite the tragedy, but because of how they had chosen to honor it. So what did you think of Richard and Emily's story? Give the story a rating from 0 to 10. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much for watching, and see you in the next story.